What's going on, guys? Today we are back with another Diablo 4 Season 2 Endgame build guide, and today we are going to be going over Barrage Rogue. Now, if any of you have been following my channel for a little bit, you'll know that I did play Barrage last season for pretty much almost the entire season, and I did play Rogue quite a bit in preseason before, like right when Diablo 4 launched. Barrage is definitely my favorite core ability by far for rogues, just due to its versatility. It's really good in single target, it's really good in AoE, and that versatility really allows you some flexibility as you're building your character. Now, this build is very good for pretty much all endgame content, including farming, T100 dungeons, as well as all of the Uber bosses. The build right now is mostly optimized for T100s, so if you are trying to do some of that harder content, this should definitely help you out. I also did kill Uber Lilith with the build, and if you haven't seen that video, it is on my channel, so go check it out. The only thing I really changed for Uber Lilith was I took out a lot of the defensive stuff that you don't really need, and I just substituted it with more damage. So if you are interested, go check that video out. In the video, we're going to be going over everything from the skill tree, the Paragon board, the gear, aspects, Vampiric Powers, everything you need to know to get you on your way. So let's get right into it. Alright guys, so we're going to start out here with the skill tree and the specialization. Now the first thing I'm going to mention is pretty much what the entire build is centered around, which is our key passive of choice, which is close quarters combat. So I took a look at all the key passives, and I think this is definitely by far and away the very best one for rogues this season, just to the insane amount of damage it gives you. Right now it's giving me 119% increased multiplied damage, which is absolutely insane. And on top of that, I'm getting 20% attack speed. I did test out precision, and I think this is definitely a lot better. So I went with this. And for that to work, we need a cutthroat and a marksman skill. Barrage is our marksman skill. So other than that, we need a cutthroat skill that we can cast reliably. And for that, we are taking Blade Shift. I really like Blade Shift because it gives you a lot of extra benefits like movement speed, 15% extra resistance to all of the elements, which is a lot, as well as it allows you to move through enemies freely, which is very nice because as a rogue, positioning is always very important to be able to do damage and take less damage. So since we are using a basic and a core skill, we are going to be going with combo points as our specialization. Um, so to start out in the skill tree, like I mentioned, we are using Blade Shift, and it is giving us all of those nice benefits. We're taking Barrage as our core skill of choice. And since we don't need the vulnerable here, since we're getting it from somewhere else, we can just take Advanced Barrage for extra crit chance. We're taking Sturdy to be tankier. We don't need Siphoning because we're getting healing from other sources, so we don't need this at all. And I'm taking Stutter Step for extra passives, for some extra movement speed. With the way the build is set up right now, you have a lot of extra points to put into like passives and stuff, so I just wanted to take a whole bunch of passives. So we're taking this. We have Shadow Step going down into the stun. We need the stun for a couple of our aspects and glyphs, so this is very nice to have. We only need 1 point into dash just for the extra mobility. 3 points into weapon mastery for more damage. 3 points into rugged for extra DR from dots, and then 3 points into reactive defense for extra DR while we are control impaired. Into the next branch, we are taking 3 points into agile for extra dodge chance whenever we use a cooldown. So that would be dash, shadow step, smoke grenade, and cold imbue. Whenever we use those, we're getting 12% dodge. I have smoke grenade maxed out because I want the longer days. I want the longer days because the longer days allows me to get more chances to proc this cooldown reduction. It also gives me more uptime on days, which is going to make me take less damage. And this also gives us a damage boost. It gives us a 25% increased damage boost. So we get more uptime on that damage boost. So I have 5 points into this. Um, I have 3 points into Exploit and Malice for more damage, 3 points into Precision Imbuement for more crit whenever we have Cold Imbue up. We only put 3 points into Cold Imbue, pathing down to Mixed Cold Imbue for more damage against crowd-controlled enemies, and then 3 points into Frigid Finesse for the big damage boost that this gives you. And then in this last branch, we only have 3 points into Innervate, just for the extra energy procs. Now I know somebody might ask me about this, why I don't have Adrenaline Rush and Haste. We don't need this because we're getting, this doesn't really matter. Um, we don't really need haste because we don't need the extra movement speed or the extra attack speed. We're already getting movement speed from a lot of different sources, like this passive here, Blade Shift, as well as extra movement speed on our boots, so we don't really need that much more movement speed. We also have a lot of mobility with Shadow Step, Dash, and Blade Shift, so I don't really think the movement speed is necessary. I'd rather take like 3 points into some extra defensive stuff over here. And then the attack speed we also don't need because we're getting it from close quarters, as well as one of our Vampiric Powers and one of our aspects. So we have more than enough attack speed. So I don't think we really need this. And then, like I mentioned, we are taking close quarters combat as our key passive of choice. So let's take a look at the Paragon board now. All right, so diving into the Paragon board, like I mentioned at the start of the video, this is mostly optimized for T100 dungeons and content where you're going to be taking a lot of damage. So you'll see I have some extra defensive options picked. Here on the first board, I'm going up to the right to get some extra damage and life, back down to the left to get some resistance and life, because you do need a lot of resistances for the T100 dungeons. And then in the glyph socket, we are using Frost Feeder. This gives you a lot of extra damage, since you will have a lot of chill uptime thanks to your Cold Imbue and the Penitent Greaves. So this is going to give you a lot of extra damage. And the increased chill effect is going to help a lot to stagger bosses faster. And since you have most of your damage in that stagger window, you want to get them staggered as fast as possible. So this is a very nice glyph to have for this build. Over here we're getting some extra armor, and then up to the left to get some extra damage, and out to the next board. Our second board is Exploit Weakness. So to start out here, we're going up to the left to grab the glyph socket, and here we're applying Turf. Turf gives you a little bit of extra damage, but it also gives you a little bit of extra DR. So this is pretty good for T100s. And then we are just filling out the points required here and also grabbing some extra vulnerable damage. Going over to the left, this board is our third board. The board order does matter, so you do want to get this board before you go over to this board and the following boards. This is the third board, which is the cheap shot board. From here, we're going and grabbing as much as much extra damage to crowd-controlled enemies as humanly possible. And the reason we want all of this extra damage to crowd-controlled enemies is because of the key passive, Close Quarters Combat, which scales off of your damage versus crowd-controlled enemies. So we want to take as much of that as humanly possible. So I come over here and I come up here and I grab this. We also grab the legendary node, cheap shot to give us extra damage. Stuff is always going to be crowd controlled, so you're always going to be getting this damage boost. And then over here to grab some extra DR from elites, again, just to help us to be tankier in those T100s. On the other path, we come down to grab more damage to crowd controlled enemies. Over towards the glyph socket, we grab this whole cluster here to get more damage to crowd controlled enemies. And then for our glyph here, we have control, which is going to give us more damage to crowd-controlled enemies. We are also getting the extra 10% multiplied to chilled enemies, and the 20% extra multiplied to stunned and frozen enemies. We're getting frozen from Cold Imbue, we're getting stunned from Shadow Step, and we're getting chill from Penitent Greaves. So we have very high uptime on those damage bonuses, which are very, very nice. and then the rest of the points here are pretty much just to max out this glyph. We want to max out this glyph for close quarters combat. So going back over to the right here from this branch, we're going up to get some extra vulnerable damage. Over to the left to grab our legendary node, which is going to give us more damage to vulnerable enemies. Over here we get some extra DR from vulnerable enemies, as well as a little bit of extra armor. And then over towards the next gate, towards the fourth board, which is the Tricks of the Trade board. From here we go up to grab some extra DR and damage right here to close enemies. On the way to the glyph socket, we branch down, we get the legendary node, which is going to give us 25% increased damage to our barrage after we cast Blade Shift. And then we're also going to come down here and grab some extra shadow resistance and max life. So this is definitely one of those inclusions that I liked to have for T100 because resistances are so important. And you also get a nice little bit of extra max life, which is nice to have. Back up towards the glyph socket, we just path through the armor. We're putting chip here for extra physical damage, as well as the extra multiplied damage it gives us whenever we deal physical damage to an enemy. We come down here to get the extra dex and the damage to elites, and then we just path up to grab the next board. Our next board here is Cunning Stratagem. On this board, we're pretty much just pathing through the glyph socket. We're grabbing some extra core skill damage here. And in this glyph socket, we have Combat Equipped, which is going to give us extra crit damage, but also give us some energy back to smooth out our energy uptime. From here, we just path out through the gate to the last board, which is the No Witnesses board. And similar to this board, we're just going to go to the glyph socket and grab some extra bonuses. So on this glyph socket, I have Pride equipped. So I wanted to use this glyph because it gives you extra multiplied damage. I saw that a lot of the other glyphs weren't really going to give any multiplied damage that might fit with this build. So I wanted to try out this glyph and it works pretty well. I was using Exploit, but this doesn't really give you any multiply damage, and the vulnerable uptime is nice, but you don't really need it thanks to the Vampiric curses. So I felt this was kind of overkill and redundant. So I wanted to try out this one, and I like this one a lot better. You can definitely tell there's a noticeable damage boost you get with this. So on this board, we just take the extra damage and the extra max life, and this is giving us a little bit of extra damage and max life, but mostly we want that extra multiplied damage. And that pretty much covers the entirety of the Paragon board. All right, guys, last but not least here, we are going to take a look at the Vampiric Powers and the gear. For the majority of T100 dungeons, I will be running this combination. We have Prey on the Weak and a Cursed Touch, which is going to give us our vulnerable for the build when comboed together. We have Ravenous just because it's going to give us an insane amount of attack speed to help speed up our build and spend process. And then for these last two slots, I found that the build mostly needed extra defense and tankiness as opposed to more damage. So I'm running these two just to be able to survive those T100 dungeons. We have Resilience for extra damage reduction, and then Undying for extra healing. And then on dungeon bosses, where you don't really need these two as much since you're not taking as much damage anymore, you could swap off these two. And then you could slot in Domination and Infection. Domination is going to give you more damage when the boss is staggered, so it's going to help you kill the boss faster. And then Infection, this procs pretty often because of how many arrows Barrage fires, and all of those arrows count towards proccing this. So every time you build and spend, you're going to be proccing this, and it does do an extra bit of noticeable damage, and it does scale off stuff like Penitent or Domination or like your Control Glyph. So this is a nice damage boost to have for bosses. But those are pretty much the only two variations I will be running the majority of the time. As far as gear goes, on the helmet I'm running Godslayer Crown just because this is really, really good, and it gives you a lot of extra damage. And you don't really need any of the other aspects that you would otherwise slot here. So we're just going to take advantage of the extra damage that this gives and uses this. On the chest piece, we have Aspect of Disobedience to give us extra armor. Um, for the stats, you want pretty much any type of damage reduction you can get. Total armor is very important to have for T100s. And then you see here I have a damage reduction from burning enemies. This is just my Sork's chest. I haven't been able to find a chest for my rogue, so I'm just using my Sork's chest. So I wouldn't have that there otherwise, but you just want to look for DR on this item. On the gloves, we are running Shared Misery to spread our crowd control effects. We want to be able to do that because we're getting a lot of damage boost from our crowd control effects, as well as defensive uptime from our crowd control effects. Stuff like Daze and Stun prevents stuff from attacking us, so we're going to be taking less damage. So the more we can spread those, the less damage we'll take. And then the chill that Penitent Greaves gives us is going to enable Cheat's Amulet, which is giving us 37.5% less damage from crowd controlled enemies. So as we start spreading our chill around and everything is chilled, we're going to be taking less damage from it. So this aspect is pretty important for the build. And then as far as stats go, I'd say these are all very good stats. The only one you probably don't need is attack speed. Since I think we overcap on attack speed right now, you're probably better off looking for like one of the lucky hit chance procs, like to slow, to heal, or to generate resource, or just more dex for more damage. On the pants, we have 4 DR stats, the total armor, like I mentioned. And then for the aspect, we have Aspect of Might, which is going to cause our blade shift to give us a 20% DR when we cast it. On the boots, we have Penitent Greaves. It's very important for the build. Not only does it give us extra damage, but it also helps us to be tankier, like I mentioned with the Cheat's Amulet. So this is very important to have for the build to work. On the main hand bow, we have a crossbow right now. You can probably run a bow or a crossbow and be okay. I don't think it really matters. I'm just running a crossbow because it's the only 925 weapon I got. We're running Edge Masters for a lot of extra multiplied damage. We're going to be pretty high on energy quite often, thanks to a lot of the stats I have. So we're going to be getting a lot of damage from this. And then for the stats, I think the only stat you really want to look for is damage to crowd controlled enemies, because that's going to scale your close quarters combat even more. All the stats on this bow are actually pretty good. Damage to close is good, core skill damage is good, dex is really good, and then crit and vulnerable damage are also very good. But the main one you really want to look for is damage to crowd control enemies. And then on the weapons, we are running the emeralds for extra crit damage to vulnerable enemies. We're running Condemnation because this is just very important to have for a combo point build. It gives you a lot of extra damage to your barrage. I have branching volleys on the sword here. That's going to cause my barrage to split more often to give me more AoE damage. So I like this aspect. You can probably run a sword or a dagger here also and be okay, so I don't think it really matters. Also, the item power in this slot isn't really that important. Like the item power on your melee weapons isn't that important because your barrage damage is going to scale mostly with your bow. So for the bow, you want to make sure you have as high item power as possible. But like for this one, for instance, you just really want to look for good stats. Um, Ideally, I would have more damage to crowd control enemies here, but I don't. But all these stats I have on here are actually pretty decent anyway, so this isn't too bad. Um, on the ring, we have Accelerating Aspect, which is going to give me more attack speed when I crit with Barrage. For the stats, crit chance is very, very, very important to have. I would say Resource Gen is also pretty good because with how fast your attack speed is and how fast you're building and spending, It is pretty easy to run out of energy, so resource gen is very nice to have. Um, I think lucky hit chance is also pretty good to have because it'll smooth out the your ability to spread your CCs, as well as it'll smooth out the chance to proc the vulnerable from the Vampiric power. And lucky hit's also going to give you more energy procs with Innervate from the skill tree. So I like lucky hit chance. I would say for the fourth stat here, ideally you'd want to look for like damage to crowd controlled enemies. That'd probably be the best one. But crit strike damage is also pretty good. On the other ring, I have pretty much similar stats. I have resource gen and crit strike chance as the two most important ones, I think. And then the other two stats are okay. Like I mentioned, you really want to look for damage to crowd controlled enemies on the rings. And then for the aspect, we have aspect of the expectant, which is going to cause our blade shift to give more damage to our barrage as we're going through our build and spend cycles with the combo points. And then on the neck, I mentioned we are running Cheat's Amulet for extra DR, because like I mentioned, the build was mostly lacking tankiness as opposed to damage. So I wanted to throw on another defensive on the amulet. Um, and as far as the stats go, energy cost reduction is very huge. I would say that's pretty important to have. I think you can get away with no total armor here, but if you can get total armor, try to get it because it does help a lot with tankiness. Um, ultimate skill damage is very useless. I don't need that at all, so that's a dead stat. And then the DR is pretty nice. The thing you really want on your neck is ranks to Frigid Finesse, because that's going to give you a lot of extra damage. So if you can find Frigid Finesse on a neck with like energy cost reduction, that's already a pretty above average neck. So definitely look for those two if you can. And then for the gems here, I'm running these just to smooth out some of my resistances, like some of the lower ones I had. So I had poison because my poison was low, the lightning one because my lightning was really low, and fire because my fire one was low. So the way this is set up right now with Blade Shift, since Blade Shift gives me 15% resistances to everything, this will be capped, this will be capped, this will be capped pretty much, and then this will be pretty much near cap, and then cold is already capped, mostly because of the resistance I get from Penitent. So I have pretty high armor, I'll have my resistance is pretty much capped, and we have a decent amount of life, so the build is definitely very tanky. And I think that pretty much covers everything for the gear. I think that pretty much concludes this build guide for Barrage Rogue for Season 2. I hope you guys enjoy the build and have fun out there. If you guys have any questions at all, please do let me know and I will answer them. If you did enjoy the video or find it helpful at all, please do consider liking, subscribing, or sharing the video, as it'll help me a lot and it'll help support the channel going forward. And I appreciate it very much, so thank you. I would expect a little bit of a slowdown in Diablo 4 content going forward. I think I pretty much did everything I wanted to do for this season. If there is anything else you guys would like to see me do, please let me know and I will try my best to get it done. Otherwise, I will likely just start posting stuff from some of the other games that I'm playing. I might come back in like maybe a couple weeks to check out another class again, but for right now, I think I'm going to be taking a little bit of a break from Season 2. So yeah, enjoy the build guides, guys. Have fun out there. Good luck with the rest of your seasons, and I will be talking to you all soon. Later.